Oh, that's just me.
Bah! All right, guys, welcome to a new episode of Bored to Death.
Yeah, there.
The before we get started, maybe you guys have noticed the fucking awesome shirt I'm wearing. Menace Brewing. They're the biggest little brewery in Bellingham, Washington. Some awesome stuff. How it got started. My good friends Ben and Tom back there started it. I think 7 or 8 years ago. I'm pretty sure. Ben, you can text me and correct me on this. But two absolutely freaking amazing guys started the brewery and a restaurant called the Local Public House in Bellingham, Washington. I was lucky enough to stumble upon a beer and food pairing where I got to meet them and instantly fell in love with what they were doing because they're two fucking amazing guys. And they got
and
the
they
whole
owned a brewery.
Yeah, and they owned a brewery. And they got Menace rolling. And recently, I got into, like I said, I became business partners with them, and the three of us kind of together sort of took it to the next level and got it going up to a great point. And now it's taken over by Ryan and BJ Flood and Joe Jeffries, who are doing some absolutely amazing things. So some really phenomenal beer, some stuff that Ben and Tom got rolling, and these guys, Ryan and BJ and Joe, are just going to take it to the next level. So if you guys are in Bellingham, Washington, stop by Menace Brewing. And can you see the back there?
Licensed to ale?
Licensed to ale. Always. So I just wanted to give all you guys a shout out. Love you all. Keep kicking ass over there and be him.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Mm-hmm.
I'll drink to that.
Ooh, is this my drink? That's your
that-
second.
that-
That's your second drink. That's your backup drink.
No, that's just her second drink.
Oh,
You're
okay.
the only one with one drink.
Oh.
You can share mine.
You have. I only have one drink, and you have a bottle of scotch.
I'll share with you. It's going to be an intellectual topic. It needs an intellectual drink.
Okay, so
My ties and this just don't go.
the topic
Are you ready?
we're going
Are you
into.
ready?
Yeah, I've been. Full disclosure, this has kind of been a nervous one. It's for I don't know, maybe good reasons, maybe bad. I'm not sure. We'll discuss it, and I guess you as the viewer can make your mind up as far as that goes. Is what we're going to be getting into this evening is a topic of a bit of controversy of late. It has to do with the masculine and feminine, the male and female brain, and kind of how those work. And if you're asking how we got on this topic, it was pretty interesting. An amazing article came out in National Geographic recently, titled I should have written it down exactly. I'm kind of paraphrasing it. If women rule the world, it's on 6 female pharaohs from ancient Egypt. And that history is kind of forgotten, unfortunately, because each one of them in their own right played a pretty integral part in kind of righting the ship of what the previous male pharaoh had kind of steered the dynasty into a bad place, for lack of a cooler word. And is what the article went on to point out is this: it was of no coincidence that these women came to power at that time, because it was because of the cognitive differences of how men and women think and react and make decisions. What they brought to the table at that time, specifically being a woman, was one of the most important things of why they were able to do what they did. if that makes sense.
That does make sense. You're good.
Okay.
Like that works.
And so to kind of talk about these pretty incredible women, pretty incredible for a lot of reasons. Obviously, Egypt at that time was, in the ancient, as far as ancient civilizations go, is incredibly advanced, and so it's sort of doesn't come as some surprise that maybe they were one of the first to have women in power, because historically, even today, we don't see that maybe as often as we should.
Yeah, it's not common.
Yeah, it's uncommon. So, and some of them, I had my notes all figured out in my
I forgot to number the pages.
nervousness before this. And we touch on this topic with the best of intentions. Luke brought it up before when we were talking. It's a sensitive topic, but an important one, because if we can discuss our differences, a lot of times that leads us to tie some connections, and that okay, we're actually more similar than we thought. And when we discuss things like what's wrong with everything, a lot of times we end up finding out what's right with situations. And so this is, I think this is an opportunity going into this topic that could possibly maybe bridge a gap that potentially some gender studies are getting into. That's the hope. That's the intention. Whether or not that'll be accomplished is yet to be seen. So it all depends on how big of a jackass we make ourselves sound like. And yes, I feel like as a man, I know it takes a certain amount of privilege of coming off and talking about a female's brain. I understand that. And so this isn't, obviously I'll work some of my own opinions in here, but absolutely everything I've taken has been from reputable medical journals, from places like Stanford School of Medicine, Yale, Harvard, American Association of Psychology, some pretty reputable deals. And for the most part, I'm regurgitating data that they've put out. I'm not smart enough to do any of this stuff myself.
It's the safest thing to do, just quote other people.
Yeah. Pass the buck.
So to speak. Man, I didn't say that. That's what he said. That wasn't me.
Yeah, but so some of these amazing women were obviously Cleopatra. Everybody knows her. Which
I didn't know she was a pharaoh, though.
Yeah, she was.
Shit.
And sort of how she came to power was really like a Sopranos style kind of deal. Like she had people fucking knocked off, like murdered, like all the way to the top. Yeah.
I know women like that.
And I've dated a few.
Dirty politics? No.
I know.
Nothing is new.
But and she's famous for a host of reasons. A famous relationship made even more well known by Shakespeare with Cleopatra and Mark Antony. But she got into power and was incredibly smooth how she worked things, and had a lot of children, and ensured and did her best to ensure that each one of those children would be placed in a position of power as well, and ended up becoming obviously historically one of the most famous women. Probably.
She's actually one of two pharaohs I know the name of, right?
Yeah,
Cleopatra?
I don't. Yeah, that and Tutankhamun or something, and I think
Is that Tut?
Tut, yeah, King Tut.
King Tut, yeah.
And I think he was only really alive for like less than 10 years. I think he was a child
He
king.
did not have a long rule, no.
And it's funny that we bring him up, because that leads us to another female. She was actually a co-leader with the king of Egypt at the time. Was a very famous woman also you may have heard of, Nefertiti.
No kidding.
Known as one of the most beautiful women ever. She was the busts of her, like in tombs, those look hot. So I can only imagine that she was pretty fucking gorgeous. I mean, it's a safe assumption. Like, if you'd fuck a statue, then that's probably that's a thumbs up. That was incredibly inappropriate.
But it is fine.
But so Nefertiti.
Why were they so good at carving statues and so terrible at drawing? Their drawings are awful, but their statues are amazing.
Well, we've discussed this at length at Aliens.
So what, the aliens did the statues and the humans did the drawings? Because there's a huge difference between the Sphinx, the statue of the Sphinx, and then the, not hieroglyphics, but like the drawings of people. It's like, man.
Maybe it's one of those things where you have to stand back from a distance. Usually from a statue, you're kind of standing back.
Can you guys give us an example of how that might go? If you guys don't know, this is we're joined tonight by Erin, Luke's lovely wife, brilliant and beautiful,
representing Kennyhood.
She's representing all women this evening because we figured it was safer to dive into this topic and actually have a woman on set.
Sorry to all my ladies
but
out there.
talk about how that goes, because that actually kind of plays into what we're going to talk about
that
later.
right now. The whole difference between men and women looking at things close?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
We'll jump back. We'll get back online.
Oh, we're good. Yeah, so God, okay, no, before we do this, we have to define our terms. We have to. Mm-hmm. Different does not mean better or worse. That's the most important thing.
Thank you.
Because gender differences does not, like, I don't know why people get so offended by that. Like, no, we can't be different. Yeah, you can be. You don't have to be better or worse. You're just different.
My personal opinion on the matter is that there's probably some inherent resentment on both sides about whatever that has to do with either sex. I'm probably staring down a horrible direction right now, but
keep going.
My nature is to just plow through. Guys realize I'm trying to explain my thought process.
And he's 3 shots in.
Whatever I say, it's with the best of intentions, and I'm gonna try to explain my thought process and how I'm getting there.
You keep scooting closer to your mic, and I keep moving it from you.
Oh, is it? Am I getting?
I'm
too
just
loud?
watching you, and you're very tall.
Okay.
We don't have headphones yet. I'm sorry. Noise canceling headphones are very expensive. And it's weird to hear yourself talking headphones.
I lost my train of thought anyways. You got to tell your story of what happened earlier.
Oh, the gender.
In
the
refrigerator.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so
in the pantry.
That's what I was getting.
I know. So in the pantry.
So there I was, wanting a drink. 2 shots of vodka and a Spindrift. And I was told the only Spindrift left was the mango one, which is shit.
Everybody hates.
Dude, don't buy the mango Spindrift.
Spindrift in general, pretty good. Mango Spindrift. Tastes like shit. And go on, Luke.
God.
Luke yells back.
I said, no, this is the only Spindrift we have. And she says, no, there's a whole nother box, and the Spindrifts come in boxes like this big. Like, it's not a small box.
Costco, baby.
And so, thankfully, I was researching gender differences today. And one of the things the guy said was, if you're a dude and you ask your wife, hey, where's this? And they say it's right there. Instead of yelling back, no, it's not right there, and sounding like an idiot, just take like 3 or 4 steps back and look again, and you'll see it. And it worked. Like, I took 3 steps back, I was halfway back to the pantry, and I looked, and I was like, oh, there it is, plain as day. I don't know how I missed it the first time.
Which is super cool, because we'll touch on that later, like why that is. Like, there's a specific part, based on what I've read of why that works, and why a woman can conceptualize that without having to do that, to take a step back like you did. And it's a really cool thing. It's a great,
because we are gatherers.
There's
where to look for a
I'm
good
not saying
deal.
anything.
When we are in the store, we can spot those clearance tags like nobody's business.
You did get some great deals on those lanterns.
Yeah.
So we need
Those
to
are fantastic.
Yes.
So this was a question. Can we just go random? Can we just go wherever it takes us?
Are we supposed to be on script?
No, we're not on script
okay.
at all. But we.
Yeah, I can always get back.
Can you mark your spot?
I actually made an outline this time.
Can you mark your spot so we can go
Yeah,
back?
absolutely. Yeah.
So this was my question as I was going down this rabbit hole earlier today as I was bored to death. It's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg sort of thing.
In reference to
gender roles and brain development, or brain structure and gender roles, like the hunter-gatherer thing, women hunter-gatherers. Did that happen because their brains developed like that and that was the role they filled, or was that the role they had to fill so their brains developed to accommodate that role? This is a dead-end question with probably no answer.
In a lot of the anthropology and archaeology classes I took, in a lot of cases, women participated in the hunt and weren't just gatherers. So I think it might have been purely
That's how we got him.
tribal based or situational. I can't recall enough to really make an accurate answer that I'm confident in. But
even if it's not evolutionary, because I don't expect you to have all the answers, the brain is very what they say plastic, which is a weird term. It means easily malleable.
Yeah.
Right. So isn't it weird that we assume when we say, okay, men and women's brains are different, we're always studying grown adults. Like they don't do these studies on 4-year-olds. I imagine
they actually, surprisingly, they do.
And they are different from birth. You answered my question.
4 to 17 months old is what a lot of these, because that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the biggest stigmas in gender studies is, well, you can't say that because those are observed cultural things that these people have absorbed, and that's why why boys or girls up to men and women act a certain way, because they're sort of learned behaviors,
right?
And so it becomes even more important to actually find out a real answer, to do studies before children really recognize, I guess, sex or gender. And in a lot of those studies, and we'll get to those, that's specifically what they do, and is what they find out in those is that they still predominantly, young girls and young boys go for the stereotypical toys and states of play that you would assume they would, and which is interesting. And and before they went there, they actually did a study on. They took 34. I'm getting the name wrong. I actually had an ex-girlfriend that had one of these monkeys, like rhesus monkey or something.
Yeah.
They're it's super cool. I'll get into that later, but there was. I woke up. It started as like a one-night stand, and we ended up dating. This is a long time ago. And I just wake up, and this is Hollywood. This is what you get. So we go home, and I wake up, and kind of don't know where I am because there's a lot going on that night.
Right.
Just
a busy night.
A lot of drinking, a lot of other stuff.
Staying up too late.
Yeah, staying up too late. And I wake up, and I open my eyes, and there's this fucking thing sitting on my chest with a diaper on. I immediately am like, Jesus Christ, like trying to swat it off me, because that's the last thing you fucking think of when you wake up in the morning after you go home, which completely with a woman that's way out of your league, and it's a fucking monkey's gonna be on you.
Did you know it was a monkey initially, or were you just completely...
No, I was just completely discombobulated.
Hair-covered baby? You had no idea?
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. But, anyway. How did I get
No
there?
offense, monkey lovers.
That was... Oh, man, that was hilarious. But always a great story to tell.
That's... Oh, God.
That monkey was a fucking shithead, too. He was a shitty human being. But
wasn't
monkey.
Ross on Friends had that shitty monkey?
Oh yeah,
it's probably really similar. Yeah. It's probably really similar.
Real spoiled creatures.
Mm-hmm. But So where I was going on that, they did the initial study with male and female infant's the wrong word, but young rhesus monkeys. and the males and females, because that, Homo sapien primate connection, some obvious parallels with behavior. They did the same thing. They went to what would be a stereotypical type of state of play or a toy that a young boy would choose, and the females went and kind of followed suit with what you would stereotypically think a young girl would choose, and the style of play that would go on it. And then they took it a step further and did this with it was 4 to 17-month-old children.
Jeez. Okay.
So pretty crazy stuff. And I didn't know that either. I thought that maybe that was kind of unethical studying kids, but I guess
it is weird who gives consent for that study.
Yeah. Not being a parent, I'm who am I to fucking say? But it was surprising that they actually do like legitimate studies with and I guess it's good. I mean, as long as the kids aren't harmed or put in a compromising position or something, which I'm sure they're not. I'm sure the studies are done well, but to kind of get how this all started off, I read this article on these female pharaohs, and I left out a few. I don't want to leave their names out. Queen Maranitha, which I'm getting that wrong. And then there's another one. These names are challenging. Queen, I'm just going to spell it. HATSSHEPSUT.
Hatchethputh.
That's exactly right.
I have no idea.
I'm sure, however you say it, it's beautiful.
I'm
just saying it's wrong.
It sounds better than it looks.
So am I.
And she was actually had, and I wish I could say her name, because she was actually one of even though Cleopatra is the most well known, she actually had the longest, most successul reign of all of them. She ruled for 20 years. She was actually the aunt of, to kind of go back, a lot of these female pharaohs stepped in because, as the case of a lot of the time is, it would be a child that would be the successor. And since the pharaohs are kind of god kings, the women would step in to kind of protect the children from political corruption and somebody trying to murder them or something to gain political gain. And so the women would step in and fill that role and fill it well, historically speaking, until the child was old enough to take the throne himself. And in this case, most of the time it was their mothers. In her case, she was his aunt. And she stepped in until he was old enough. And like I said, ruled for 20 years. And by all accounts, during that dynasty, had a very successful reign.
So here's a question. There were 6 of them?
Yeah.
And they were all good?
Yes. And that's kind of where the Egyptologist that has been doing a lot of these studies on those specific 6 female pharaohs, Karakuni, that's where she sort of started the argument, was maybe the past is giving us a blueprint for the future, possibly. And there's something to be there. I wouldn't be doing this, wouldn't have taken this notes, and you wouldn't have either, unless we thought there was probably something to that, perhaps.
It's worth looking into, and it's weird that people are so I've got people. That's a general term.
You people.
You people. Some people.
Yeah.
How do you say this safely?
It's
odd that anyone would be. We need to find someone who we can talk to. I don't know anybody who's offended by the idea that men and women are different, but apparently they exist because you hear about them. Mm-hmm. And it's just odd that anybody would be so offended by that idea, given that there's so much science, which sort of reinforces that concept. Like it's not like it's flying in the face of evidence. It's literally in line with everything.
It's not, and if like I could. bring it up. Unfortunately, it's on my phone, which we use as a second deal, and I didn't switch it to the iPad. But there were 374 medical journals just specifically on the autonomic nervous system differences between men and women. So that's just on that. And these are all commissioned studies done by major universities, big think tanks, stuff like that are looking
which
into
tend to be liberal.
and like I don't want to bring politics into it, but generally speaking, yes.
Which you would think would be accepted by people that think
So it's
like that.
It's odd in that that different is deemed as bad, and that's the biggest thing we want to hit on here is that when we say different, we're not talking about better or worse, this way or that. We're just talking about like different, and is what we should be doing is like different should be celebrated. That's what we tell. Like that's the message that we're sending out every day is uniqueness. Celebrate your uniqueness. I've got a really young nephew who's gonna be an incredible young man, and he's ended up saying that he's essentially stated that he's gay at a very young age, and that's something that that's what we celebrate. Be who the fuck you are, and be proud of it, and have no shame. There's some things that will come along with being who you are. Some people won't be ready for that, but that's just part of life. But differences need to be celebrated, and the more we celebrate those, the more we can kind of see like, okay, our differences complement each other, because what you have that I lack, like mentally, physically, or whatever, if we come together and work together, then some strengths I have might be some stuff you lack, or or
Exactly.
you, and it's so those are really important things, and I love you, buddy, too, and I'm proud of you for doing that.
We're all proud of you. Very hard.
But there's some interesting stuff that goes along with that, and is one of the things that Karakuni said was a statement, a quote she made. Cognitive scientists know the female brain is different from men's. Women are less inclined to start a war, more inclined to be in touch with emotions, and more nuanced. What if women were allowed to rule with the full force of emotions, using their emotions, a trait they are demonized for, to create connections, find compromise, find nuance solutions?
Okay, I'm going to butt in here.
Mm-hmm.
Please do.
Because, yes, I believe that our emotions can help in some circumstances in ruling the country, dominating relationships, whatever. However, I know my emotions can absolutely get the best of me at some times, and I know I can rule on completely emotion one week, and then the next week look back and think, what the hell happened back there? Like,
Who was that?
Must be a woman, because I do that all the time.
No. Men go through their, if you track men's emotions and how they react to certain things, they 100%, this is just my experience in talking to many other women.
It's good.
No, I am talking about you. But you guys
good.
absolutely go through some sort of PMS, as do we, because you can track your guys' emotions to the week. Like, we can track down what week are you going to be more angry, what week are you more likely to say yes, and I've had this conversation with many women before. So I think Like-
giving away all your secrets.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Don't apologize to us. I'm fucking taking
I
notes.
need to write this down.
We know what's going on.
What did you say again? Go back.
Oh, you're slow on that. Yeah, come on.
Whereas men,
I've been
and,
drinking.
and
Oh,
coming
man.
from, and I might regret saying this later because this is super controversial, but I think in the larger aspect of things, I think men more likely are to think, even though you guys 100% go through your little emotional roller coasters yourself, you guys are more likely to think logical than women, where we do think logical, but the emotion is also sometimes more in play than the logic. For instance, me this past week had an emotional roller coaster myself, and I had to bring myself back down to earth, and that was way harder for me to do than it seems like any guy, where you go through your emotional roller coaster. However, that logic always like the non-emotion always rules, whereas the I don't know.
No, that makes sense. I think if you're done with that topic, then what you said earlier, that I must be a woman. So we need to talk about that, because that's the thing. It's I don't know if you ended up reading it, but I ended up reading that most scientists agree that brains tend to either err on the masculine or feminine.
It's and that's actually right. It's actually that's actually our default mechanism, to default to the feminine.
No kidding.
Yeah.
It's like when we're tired.
It's actually interesting. Yeah, when it starts with during puberty, when the flood of estrogens hit women and androgens hit men. If any biological blocking of produced testosterone will automatically make you default towards what seems to be more present in the female brain.
Well, there you go. And so it ends up. So the male-female brain is not. It's we have to define it. I think that's what happens. I think this is
It's
it.
tough to define.
That people think that when you say male or female, they think it's a line down the middle, and you either have one side or the other. But it's not. It's a spectrum.
It's kind of a fluid
It's
thing.
it's nuanced.
It's a male and female, and that's not the middle line. Those are the end lines.
Yeah.
And you can be anywhere in between, and maybe not always on any given day be. I mean, we're all maybe more. I mean, like, let's say in a good way. Let's frame it in positive. Like, sometimes men are more sensitive. Sometimes. And sometimes we're just logical, unfeeling. Like, well, this has to happen because this happened and this happened.
Which sometimes makes a good leader. Whereas,
Sometimes.
the people that you had mentioned earlier, Heath, those sometimes make, better leaders also. So it just kind of depends. It's almost like how... I don't know if you'd brought this up yet, or if this was just totally off camera, but how they kind of complement each other.
And you're absolutely right. And we find that out kind of later on, and it's which is probably the neatest thing about all this. And really, we could probably skip through a lot of the bullshit that we've written down here, because that's the root of all of it. Is all of this science here, guys, points to there are some fantastic and fascinating parts of the human brain, male and female, and the differences that they've found are interesting. Like the corpus callosum, the bundle of nerves that connects both hemispheres of your brain, is twice as large on average in women than it is in men. Now, that's just not by accident. It's for a specific reason. The human body didn't evolve into what it is without a specific reason for each function that happens. And there's a host of other things. There's the prefrontal cortex in women develops years before it does in a man, which allows women to perceive risk and details and verbalization years earlier than a male can. So it's like they're much more mature than we are. I mean, like we catch up, maybe.
No,
I don't think
No,
we
you
do.
guys totally can. Well,
no,
I mean, you guys have your. Do you remember? in
Every
fifth
girl I've ever
grade-
dated has been way past me.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm
Like-
34 and I struggle with risk assessment. Risk assessment has nothing to do with risk. It's like, how fun is it going to be, and is it worth it? It has nothing to do with the amount of risk.
And that's a big thing with with risk assessment just in general. And that's why
Well,
I mean, you could draw a specific link of that's why men die on average like a decade before women. It's because we fucking were like, fuck it.
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
I think that's why
Yeah,
you see so many people dating, like, so many women date men that are so much older.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they can be like 10 plus years older.
That would
because
make
they
sense.
are on their same mental level.
Yeah, and
Well,
it's exactly. I think it's probably a really good point.
Is that one of those things that society has gotten more wrong as we progress in Western culture?
With-
Like
oh.
now, like you end up marrying someone your same age, and so the girl's just frustrated for 20 years.
Yes.
Where it
Yeah.
used to be like the guy was marrying someone 15 years younger, and that was acceptable. But now it's like, oh Jesus, what are you doing?
Oh God.
Are we regressing as a culture?
Oh, I'm sure. I've regressed. I'm currently regressing. But and there's some. I just want to pick out of my notes like some more stuff. The anterior cortex, on average, 20% larger in women. That's what it's referred to as the worry center. The process emotions, arrange memories, ruminate. It's thought that that's why women have a higher rate of anxiety. But there's parts of the men's brain that are thought to be associated with women are more adept to have anxiety or depression. Men are more adept to have alcoholism or some sort of dependency on something else. So the
So that sounds like a terrible combination right there. You have one worrying person who's constantly thinking
and
of
then
the
that's
worst,
constantly
and the other one's
drinking
like,
to
"Oh,
deal with his
shit."
worries. Yeah, and there's
I don't know. Could that happen? No, I'm just gonna have this drink.
I won't worry about it if I'm drunk enough. It's fine.
but yeah, and then so those like the prefrontal
So
cortex.
is it a terrible combination?
No, it's
Or a complimentary one.
well, that's
That's
it.
kinda
Kind of
like-
leads into it ends up being with a lot of differences that they are complementary. Like with each corresponding, and this goes for the nervous system as well. How it works for each weakness or strength that men or women have cerebrally. The opposite sex has the corresponding strength or weakness. So it would seem that it's perhaps they're meant to work together as a team.
Right.
And because they're one sex on average, and I'll reference a quote that is because they're not, in some cases they're not monumental differences, but they're measurable. So, and in order to, you have to have something that you have to quantify it somehow.
Right.
And so they're in one of the studies I read by what's his name? Sorry. Shit.
So I'm super curious now. Like, is that more like absolute male female brain, or is that like scientifically, like you're born male, you're gonna think like this, or scientifically you're born female, you're gonna think like this, or is it like if you're born female and you have identify more masculine
I wanted to talk about this.
things and feel more masculine, and you're more attracted to women, let's say, then is that complimentary, or
Well,
has
and
there
that's
been
kind of
studies
what
about that, because it seems like it is complimentary.
it seems like it is, and that's what, and the way you use masculine and feminine, I think that, like what we were discussing earlier, that that might seem to be the more correct way to reference it, just because one thing we didn't touch on is why this is kind of a touchy subject to begin with is current gender studies are really getting away from all of this and pointing out to that the only difference that you see cognitively between men and women is observed or learned cultural differences.
Right.
And it's what the science is pointing to, that no, these are some hardwired inherent things that just develop in one sex or one gender in the other.
So this is we were talking about this earlier. That I'm going to plagiarize a video I saw today, where the guy went to great lengths to clarify, because it's a touchy subject. Studies like these are still done based on the 1995 version definition of gender, which is now more commonly referred to as sex. Mm-hmm. But sex 30 years ago was apparently an offensive term, so they said gender instead. And now gender can be anything by definition, but sex is still, in these studies, they have no choice but to define sex as male, female. They don't have enough of a sample group to branch out and study however many genders there are. Mm-hmm. So they went to great lengths to clarify that this is the reason this is male, female is not because people are intolerant or prejudiced. It's just that's the only way they can study this material. And your brain is gonna be, like we said, a spectrum. It leans one way or the other, and it doesn't. I'm super curious. I have it written down. As the gender spectrum gets maybe more accepted or more, I don't want to say popular, more accepted. That's what I'll say. When these studies are done, I'm going to be super curious to see if maybe this whole identify as, like, where that leads. Like, are people that say I identify as this and they're going to stay to their brain and they go like, oh, this makes sense because this is your brain structure. Mm-hmm.
Well, perhaps what you mentioned earlier, the plasticity.
It could also be that.
Maybe like, I mean, there's this is kind of going down an interesting path because there's. I subsequently am very into, the quantum realm and manifesting things and being able to like create your reality, and a lot of those things state, and a lot of those teachers that you can, shift and reconnect and make new neural connections. And so if you do strongly identify enough with one gender or the other, I wouldn't say that's outside of the realm of possibility.
It seems like it's going to either be a cause and effect one way or the other. Either your brain was already like that and that's why you feel that way, or you feel that way strongly enough your brain changes. Obviously your brain is, the studies on how your brain develops and the things that affect your brain are amazing. They're everything from nutrition to sleep to stress to how you're raised to culture to activities you do for fun, which obviously which came first. Do you do that for fun because your brain was wired that way, or did you find it and then your brain adapted to that activity? Like video games are the common one they do studies on because they're so popular that if you do video games, you actually increase your ability to multitask, make split-second decisions, operate on limited information. And it's one of those things, like, the more you play video games, the better you get at those. Now, the worse you get at other things, but your brain can adapt to whatever. So, I don't know. I was reading today. I was pretty curious as to how that is going to be researched, because it will eventually be researched.
You would think so.
It has to be.
It's, because it's there's obviously going to be some nuanced differences between, like, some men, no matter how masculine, will no doubt have some what we might be construed as like a female tendencies, and women vice versa. You see women that act very quote masculine. You see some men that act quote feminine, but they still, I guess, in coupling, they still play the role of masculine and feminine as far as relationally. And those and who
I
knows
don't
if
think all of them do though.
well no, I'm just using it like some, like on
Yeah.
occasionally
Some of
you'll
them,
see that, and fuck, I don't lose my train of thought, Heath. Come on.
I'm sorry.
You can do it. You were running and Aaron just came in and was like,
It's so fragile all the time. It's like
it's like on a wire.
I don't think it was that important. I was more
How there's masculine and feminine. I think you're going down the path that they still complement each other.
they do.
Probably.
Yeah. No matter
Yeah.
no matter if it's the woman
So-
playing the masculine role or the male playing
More feminine.
a
role.
more what would be
Yeah.
construed as a feminine role, they still complement each other in how they work together. And so it would still seem that it's not the difference is not a bad thing by any means. It's the difference actually is more of a reason to work more closely together, more of a reason to bridge a gap instead of create a wider one, which is if we deny that difference exists, we're kind of creating like more of an invisible void. Like it's just like we're not. It's like a relationship where you have problems that you refuse. You just deny they exist, and you refuse to deal with them, and it doesn't become a problem until down the road something happens and it really does become a problem because it was never dealt with and the conversation was never had. And I think it's important to have this conversation because it's like I said, like what we started this podcast out with. These differences are, I'll go out on a limb. I'll say it. They're there, and they're okay, and they're good.
You just hopefully end up with someone whose differences complement yours. That's the whole plan.
Right. Yeah, it's like
regardless of everything else.
like the old adage, opposites attract. It probably fucking came from somewhere.
But
I imagine I'm not smart enough to think
before
of
all
it.
these studies, they already knew it.
Yeah, there's a lot, and there's probably endless amounts of that stuff, and there's I just wanted to kind of read off some other things that they found out in some of these studies. Women, it's known retain stronger, more vivid memories of emotional events than men do. They recall emotional memories more quickly,
Every guy knows.
and
this.
the ones they recall are richer and more intense.
Oh yes.
As is likely, the amygdala figures into depression or anxiety. Any failure to separately analyze men's and women's brains to understand their different susceptibilities to either syndrome would be self-defeating and not knowing left from right. In a 2014 study, University of Pennsylvania researchers imaged the brains of 428 male and 521 female youths, an uncharacteristically huge sample, and found that females' brains consistently showed more strongly coordinated activity between hemispheres, like I said, the corpus callosum, than activity, while the male's brain was more tightly coordinated within local brain regions. Observations of the corpus callosum is a cable that connects both hemispheres, as I stated. Women are twice as likely as men to experience clinical depression in their lifetimes. Likewise for post-traumatic stress disorder. Men are twice as likely to become alcoholic or drug dependent and 40% more likely to develop schizophrenia.
That's true. I've read several instances of that. Like, you look at the murders and stuff that go on. Because I'm a huge Dateline shout out.
Hashtag it.
Hashtag Dateline. Hashtag, as my mom and I call it, wine and Dateline.
Your mom's even doing it?
Oh,
Oh, shit.
No, she has the wine.
she,
not the-
yeah,
Yeah,
she
okay,
does,
I
she
thought
does
she
the
was-
wine and
I
Dateline.
thought she was
She doesn't do the
hashtagging too. I
hashtag
was
wine
like-
and Dateline. I don't even know if there's hashtag like that, but there should be if there isn't.
You can always make one. It's very easy.
That's true. If I was on social media, yeah. Now I'm like you. What was I talking about?
It's tough, right?
I
It
know.
happens.
Yeah. So,
I'm gonna check the
schizophrenia.
battery. Just real quick.
If you,
Oh, I thought it was plugged in.
I just want to make sure it is.
Okay.
It is. Yeah, we're
All
good.
right.
So if there's the schizophrenia is huge in men, they have a way higher risk, like you said, of schizophrenia,
The amount of
which is super sad.
Some of the research I went into, the serial killers, it's like a 95 to 5% difference between men and women.
Really dominating that field.
Yeah. But there's
Women get Alzheimer's more.
There's
by a
some-
large margin.
That is, that is.
There's some-
That's sad too.
There's some
Alzheimer's
good
sucks.
stuff too. I mean, women excel in several verbal ability, pretty much all of them, except for verbal analogies. Women's reading comprehension and writing ability consistently exceeds that of men on average. They outperform the men in tests of fine motor coordination and perpetual speed. They're more adept at retrieving information from long-term memory. Men, on average, can more easily juggle items in working memory. They have superior visuospatial skills. They're better at visualizing what happens to be complicated 2- or 3-dimensional shapes.
Okay,
as
I'm gonna butt in
rotating-
here. Let me kind of interrupt you here.
I've been nothing but compliment women. I'm gonna let me finish it.
I'm pretty sure at some points, like, I understand, like, the whole, there's some circumstances where women are, like, less likely to be able to spatially visualize things. But
I've heard that.
when I go into Pier 1 and I say, hey, this is going to look great on our coffee table,
Wait,
and
men take
men
notes
think
right now.
that's not going to
She's-
fit,
She's,
that's not going to match.
she's had a little bit to
that's
drink,
not
so
gonna
she's dropping some secrets
dropping
right now.
some secrets right now. When you guys say, nah, don't think that's gonna work, guess what? It's gonna, because it looks great,
Yeah.
or because we already have our fine-tuned skills mapped out to where what we think is important is this vase that's gonna look great on this table right here.
You know what?
So
If
what?
it doesn't work,
we might not be able.
It'll
to,
end
like,
up in some fucking room that you end up doing a podcast in.
Yeah, and you know what? We might not be able to know, like, how big this is, because who knows how big that is right there. We don't know. We don't know how many inches
If you guys
this
could
is.
see, like,
But-
the left and right of where the camera is, you can see where all this stuff is she's talking about.
It all fits.
It all fits.
It all fits.
Oh god, that's great. No, but
we know.
There's just
We know.
Are you done your rant? You want to keep going?
Yeah, that was it.
You did a great job.
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, there is.
But you
There's
go
just
back to
like
complimenting women.
there's a.
Yeah, you can go back to that. Mm-hmm.
She was really
Okay. So men on average can more easily juggle items in working memory. They have superior visuospatial skills. They're better at visualizing what happens when a complicated 2- or 3-dimensional shape is rotated in space, at correctly determining angles from the horizontal and tracking moving objects, and at aiming projectiles. Navigation studies in both humans and rats show that females of both species tend to rely on landmarks, while males are more typically rely on dead reckoning, calculating one's position by estimating the direction and distance traveled rather than using landmarks.
And that's true, because you know how I know how to get to work? I turn right after the restaurant.
There's
There's a restaurant by my work. I know. Right
before
after the restaurant, you turn.
Before I forget, I didn't want to lose this one deal. This one piece of evidence might be one of the most compelling, and it's only been done in rats, but an interesting thing, kind of what I was talking to you earlier about, biloteria, which is
I just heard about this today.
which is
I've
what
not heard this
which
at
is
all.
what we are. It's a being with an orifices of mouth, cavity that contains all the major organs in an anus, essentially. It's kind of and
You've really narrowed it down.
and a central nervous system. They're biloteria, and we belong in that family. Obviously, it's a very wide, diverse family, but there are the differences within that. I wish my vocabulary was better.
Just make a couple words like you do sometimes.
I need my Amanda, where are you? You're fucking smart. You're supposed to tell me this shit. I'm probably even saying it wrong. It's probably not even bilateria. But the differences in that group are generally minimal, and they're generally within the development of the brain. They're as humans we've got what's called the old brain and the newer brain. The old brain's generally referred to as the reptilian brain. That's what the oldest part of our development is back there. And I did some. Where's my
I wish you guys could see his nose.
brain map?
They're comprehensive.
So there's your old brain. You got your it's arousal, relay of information, your brain stem, your medulla, all that stuff that controls a lot of the sympathetic nervous system, like the beating of the heart, the breathing of the lungs, or excuse me, the autonomic nervous system, and the brainstem, which is the most ancient core of the brain. That's kind of where everything started to form around and get more developed and more complex. I completely forgot what I was talking about.
The interesting, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Thank you. So that's generally where beings in that group differs, is just the complexity of the brain. So with rats, which there's enough of a connection for us to do the majority of our animal testing with rats in cognition to kind of draw this connection. Each gene is what they've broken down to in what's her name?
Nefertiti.
No. I bet she was a hottie. Larry Cahill and Diane Halpern's study. Diane is a PhD, the president of the American Psychology Association. Larry Cahill, PhD, and the head of the Journal of Neuroscience Research. Broke it down to the gene level and the chromosomes. There's the genes that are specific to male and females with I guess caring about, I'm probably paraphrasing this wrong, but like in I don't know, taking care of your space, caring for your young and stuff like that. They took male and female rats, and they can actually deactivate a gene, and they deactivated both the exact same gene in males and females. The male acted completely the same. The female completely changed her type of behavior and abandoned the young and abandoned her nest.
No kidding.
So it's obviously how those genes interact with the brain is hugely different. And if that study was only done once, you'd be like, okay,
right.
But it was done repeatedly over and over again, where this gene was deactivated and males continued to have no effect on them, and females, what would be construed as traditional female rat behavior, completely abandon it. So they act like the males, or they act like beyond the males. Just incoherently.
Yeah.
It just completely changed that. But that was that was more or less the only specific pattern of behavior that it changed. Was taking care of their young and protecting the nest, which is generally what female rats. It's one of the characteristics.
Right.
So that's pretty interesting.
That goes back to the whole. Okay, so this is maybe how we should have defined it earlier. Mm-hmm. The reason all these studies are done is because it's the difference between XX and XY. Because that's it. You're always XX or you're XY. Not always. Most of the time. Mm-hmm. And that's why these studies are done. That's how they differentiate it. XX or XY. Mm-hmm. Which is important to if you're one of the people that gets offended by the notion that men are men and women are women. Mm-hmm. this is why these studies are done this way. It doesn't mean they're bad studies. It just means that this is all they have to go off of. It's how things affect chromosomes, and that's how behavior is determined, and that's how gender roles in every animal is determined, is what chromosomes do they have. There you go. That's what it is.
Yeah, there's some, and that's one of my favorite sayings that you use. At some point you have to define your terms to start getting measurables.
Yeah.
Because there's Brené Brown, a lady who I love, a ton of her books. One of the first TED Talks I saw of her, she made this comment. She's like, I was super into science. If I couldn't measure it, it didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how science is done. It's got to be quantifiable. It's got to be measurable.
You have to define it somehow.
Yeah,
you have
there's
to create
gotta,
categories. You have to placebos and
to show where things differ, and that's and so it's at some point, there's got to be some sort of a definition, unless you're going to. I suppose if they're just going to lump, just Homo sapien sapien into one mega category.
It's such a disservice, though.
It seems like it would be.
It really is, yeah.
Because there's
the more details
from like a novice scientist wannabe, I would want to know more, and I think that would be sort of.
I agree. The more details, the better, because there are like you say like there's male, female, and then you dive more into males, and then there's differences between all the males.
Right.
There's differences between all the females, and I think that's important to recognize.
It I think it is too, and recognizing the strengths of either, like there's that can what if we found some thing like in a woman's brain that was like it opened up some deal for like an incredible knowledge or advancement, and humanity could advance. We could, and it led to her like solving global warming or something. Perfect. What if that's something like we're missing out on, and by denying this stuff just because we're stupidly insulted and too sensitive to deal with it, we're actually leading ourselves like full steam ahead into our own demise.
Denial is never looked back fondly. Look back on fondly. No one ever looks back in history and goes like, they were denying it. Totally cool. Like, no, it never goes that way. If any time evidence pointed towards something and people said, nah, maybe not, it never.
The history books are not kind to you.
No, you end up being the idiot.
Yeah.
Which just seems like, you would want to accept evidence and studies, peer-reviewed studies. Like, you think it would be good to look at knowledge outside of your comfort zone and say, maybe this is true. And it's so weird that we still as humans. Well, okay, so maybe we'll talk about this, the hierarchy thing. That humans struggle to define order. We always do. It's so hard for humans to say, I don't know, or it doesn't matter. Those are two things we are not good at.
Right.
We're always trying to quantify things or put things in order. And I think that's where the differences thing comes in, is like, if somebody says different, we have to think better or worse. And there's almost no universal case where something is universally better or universally worse. There's almost no scenario. I can't think of any, actually, where it's universally better to have a female brain or a male brain. Like, there's not. Like, sometimes having a male brain sucks. It's awesome. It's mostly awesome.
Yeah, you don't know what vase to put it on the freaking coffee table.
My house would be a disaster. It'd be blank. It'd be empty. There'd be no decor. But the people get so obsessed with better or worse, and science is not generally about better or worse. It's just about quantifying data and differences. And then once you have that information and knowledge, pee break?
I need a pee break.
It's not in the.
Once you have the knowledge, then you can actually utilize it and You can go ahead and go if you want. We
J-
can't
just
stop rolling.
come
we don't-
back.
We don't.
I
we
didn't
don't
know if we did a timeout or
Oh.
what. I'm the
No,
guest on
we-
the show. I don't know how you guys do.
We
your
just
thing.
go until we run out of alcohol.
The
Okay.
We better go. But yeah, well, I'll fill you in when you come back.
BRB.
She took the time to write it down, and I just had to read it.
That's hilarious.
Nail brains. I can't make sense of this. I'll read it out loud.
There's an example right there.
But it just seems like now I'm off track. It would be so beneficial to accept the differences and learn how to maximize their potential, as opposed to just denying it entirely. I don't understand the desire to deny specifically this differences between men and I don't get it.
There is no reason, and obviously nobody, when you get down to it, like, we could play the what if game all day, but that's the only reason science exists, because somebody said, what if this,
Right.
then that,
Yeah.
or something. So we're kind of in a position where we have to play the what if game in order to advance humanity. Because if we're not trying to discover more new amazing things about ourselves and about the world around us, which is, we're discovering new stuff about, climate change and stuff like that every day, and ecosystems and stuff like that. Why aren't we trying to discover new stuffs about us as well? Because maybe therein lies, the lock, unlocking the key that can solve these complex problems within different ecosystems and things like that.
Somebody needs to do a study. Somebody needs to put together a composite team and see how far it goes.
Yeah, and there's
Obviously
complexities that go in, like, obviously, like, whether or not it's ethical, or not, which is a big one. But anyways, I don't know. What do you think?
I'm almost out of notes. Oh, no. Let's see here. I've honestly talked myself out. I feel pretty good about it.
I feel this is one of the few times I feel like I've said my piece.
I think you did great. You sure? Because you still have like six,
We
six
kind
pages.
of, I think we hit on most of
bounced around most of it.
most of the major things I wanted to talk about.
I hope that sound got picked up on camera. It's my favorite sound.
It's wired in your brain.
It is. I don't. Oh man, it's the best thing you can do is end up with someone whose differences are compatible with yours. That's it, regardless of how many chromosomes they have.
Yeah, and it's like everything else, isn't? It's not the more the better, is it?
Generally not.
Yeah. It was not meant to be offensive to anybody. I should have just.
God, I don't think we could have possibly been offensive to anybody. We're very understanding.
It's just to reiterate one more time, guys. Like I said, the things we hit on, we tried to go off as much of hard science as we could, and we can't hammer this in enough to say that it's anytime the word different has been thrown out there or anything, it's like. It's more of a compliment than anything that's wrong. We can say it till we're blue in the face. Like, differences are something we celebrate, and what seems odd and different today, with new science and new studies, is the next amazing thing that we stumble upon. So that's kind of how history and new discoveries have always worked.
I'm gonna audit a gender studies class. I want to see what they talk about.
It would be cool. It'd be interesting.
I wonder if CBC has one online.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I
I
imagine.
don't think I can show up to class, but I think I can take it online.
They'd be like, "Who's that chick?" That's the ugliest woman I've ever seen.
With that,
all right, should we wrap it up?
Yeah, cheers.
All right, guys, thank you for joining us again on another episode of Bored to Death and kind of following our the winding path of wherever our
We
fucking
can't call
thoughts
it
go.
progression. Let's be honest. Progression is not a word we can use to describe this.
And so I'll give Aaron, our guest
Hi,
Aaron,
thank
a round of
you.
applause.
Thank you.
He's one of our very first guests.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, again.
So, all right, guys, we love you.
Hopefully, I'll be
and
back.
Honestly, don't forget Care for Wild, the rhino sanctuary for orphan baby rhinoceros in South Africa in the Kruger National Forest. If you can, donate them. It's at Care for Wild on Instagram or Twitter. They're doing all sorts of great things. The rhinos need our help. They're disappearing faster than they can procreate. So, anyways,
Save the rhinos.
save the rhinos. You guys kick ass. Love you.
Cheers.
Bye.